All right. It is 1 minute past the hour, so I think we will get rolling today. Welcome, everybody, to Night with the Experts, which is a monthly program by Nuclear Energy Information Service, and we're based in Chicago, Illinois. The purpose of our sessions is to give you, the viewers and the audience, an opportunity to meet some of the more well-known energy experts locally and around the country. The way we run this is to kind of convert the usual webinars on their head and give you the opportunity to ask questions, get into dialogue, and get more out of this than many other webinars do, where the talking heads take over and then you don't get a chance to ask or answer your questions. So I'm going to turn this over to my co-host tonight. That's Jan Budart, who is a board member of NEIS. So Jan, why don't you take it away?
Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. And I want to introduce our other board member who's present, Stephanie Belenko. I would like now to introduce our speaker. Tonight, it is our pleasure to have distinguished guest and presenter, Mark Z. Jacobson, who authored 3 textbooks and 170 peer-reviewed journal articles, which focus on better understanding air pollution and global warming problems and developing large-scale clean, renewable energy solutions. He has won awards for his work on how black carbon impacts the climate and for developing state and country energy plans. And Apoliticus named him one of the world's 100 most influential people in climate policy. His work is the scientific basis of the energy portion of the U.S. Green New Deal and laws to go to 100% renewable energy in cities, states, and countries worldwide. In addition, Dr. Jacobson is a professor at Stanford University, and he co-founded the solutionsproject.org. So welcome, Dr. Jacobson, and take it away.
Thank you very much, Jan and David, for inviting me. So yeah, I'm going to talk, I guess, for 25 minutes I'm going to share my slides. I'll show some slides trying to explain what our energy plans are and also why we don't include nuclear power in our plans. So hopefully this will, can you see these?
Yes.
Good. So let me just start out by saying that, so we've been developing these energy plans since 2009, so for 12 years to try to erase air pollution, global warming, and energy insecurity. And worldwide, 7 million people die from air pollution. And in the US, it's about 78,000. Shows here in Japan, it's about 54,000. These are people per year, but worldwide, 7 million, it's about $30 trillion per year in terms of statistical cost of life and morbidity. Global warming is expected to cost the world about $25 to $30 trillion per year by 2050. And because fossil fuels are scarce resources, they will run out over time, and this will result in energy price increases, economic, social, and political instability. So these are drastic problems that require drastic solutions. And so people wonder, well, in addition to clean renewable energy, why don't we include nuclear power? And we don't, it's not because we're biased against nuclear power, it's just because it's not as good. It doesn't do the job as well as clean renewable energy. In terms of carbon dioxide equivalent emissions, it's not zero carbon. They're about 9 to 37 times more carbon dioxide equivalent emissions in air pollution per unit generated from nuclear power than from wind. And I'll show you exactly why that is the case in a few minutes. It takes now, and this is for new nuclear power plants, it takes now 10 to 19 years between planning and operation of a new nuclear power plant versus half a year to most 5 years for wind solar. And the cost per unit energy right now of new nuclear is about 4 to 5 times that of onshore wind and utility scale photovoltaics. Therefore, it takes 2 to 38 times longer to obtain 1/4 to 1/5 the energy per 1/4 to 1/5 the CO2 savings per dollar than wind. So it's just really little benefit from new nuclear power, mostly because it takes so long and is so inexpensive. In addition, The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change says there's robust evidence and high agreement that increased use of nuclear power leads to more weapons proliferation risk, meltdown risk, waste risk, and mining risk. So for all these reasons, we don't include nuclear in our plans. Now, this long time between planning and operation, people usually just look at the construction time, which is also long. But really, when you're looking at how long it takes for something to be constructed, you have to also look at how long it takes to be planned. And for nuclear, it's about 10 to 19 years. The site permits 3.5 to 6 years. Construction permit approval and issues 2.5 to 4 years. Construction times 4 to 9 years. Now, coal is also long, 6 to 11 years. Biomass 4 to 9 years. But wind and solar are either 2 to 5 years for utility scale. Rooftop PV you can do in half a year. So it's not even a comparison anymore. We need to solve 80% of the climate and pollution problems by 2030. That's within 9 years. If you have a technology that's taking you 15 years between planning and operation, that just doesn't help. And just to give you an idea of the construction and planning to operation times of some recent reactors around the world, in Finland, there's one that's 21 years now. It still hasn't been finished. Hinkley Point in UK, it's expected to take 17 to 19 years. And that's won't be done until 2026, so that'll probably be delayed more. In the US, Vogtle 3 and 4 just got delayed more, so they'll be at least 16 to 17 years. France, 19 years. Even in China, between 12 and 14 years. And the early plants in Sweden, even the very first ones in Sweden, were 10 to 18 years. So this is just pretty much every nuclear reactor built is 10 to 19 years between planning and operation. It's just not useful for going forward to solving the climate problem. What about CO2 emissions, nuclear versus wind? The life cycle emissions, which most people refer to only, is between 9 and 70 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. That's for building the nuclear plant, mining it, mining the uranium, refining it, and then decommissioning at the end of the life. This is within the range of IPCC. For wind, it's 7 to 11. But then there's the opportunity cost, the time lag between planning and operation versus wind. You're burning fossil fuels in the meantime. So you have a lot of emissions due to the delays of nuclear plant production. Then nuclear plants produce heat. That has a small component of global warming relevant emissions. The heat emissions actually is about 1.6 grams of CO2 equivalent per kilowatt hour. Then there's the water vapor from nuclear plants. It's around 3. There's a risk, a weapons proliferation risk, which ranges from 0 if there's no nuclear explosions resulting from nuclear energy proliferation to 1.4 grams per kilowatt hour if there's one limited nuclear war over 30 years. So that's, people criticize that a lot, but it's a small addition. And then just covering land with impervious material, it's a small amount too. Anyway, 78 to 178 grams per kilowatt hour versus 4.8 to 8.6 for wind. Notice wind has negative heat and moisture fluxes. Wind turbines reduce water evaporation, so water vapor is a greenhouse gas. So that's why there's actually a cooling due to wind turbines on a global scale because they reduce water vapor emissions. And also because there's also the reduced condensation and in the atmosphere that reduces direct heat flux as well, because there's this global cooling due to the water vapor. So that there's a coolant. There's two impacts of the water vapor. One is you have less water vapor in the air due to wind turbines, and water vapor is a greenhouse gas. So that's the anthropogenic heat flux reduction. And the second is because water vapor, when you have less water vapor in the air, you have less condensation that occurs. And so that's the second reduction. Anyway, let's look at what we do include. So we do propose to power the world entirely with wind, water, and solar for all purposes. And so we have to transition transportation, building, heating, and cooling, and industry to electricity or some direct heat, and provide the electricity and direct heat with wind, water, and solar. So, for example, transportation, we'll use battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. For heating, cooling, we'll use electric heat pumps, some solar hot water preheating, some geothermal direct heat, and we'll have district heating and cooling. And for industry, we'll electrify that with arc furnaces, induction furnaces, resistance furnaces, dielectric heaters, and electron beam heaters. These are existing technologies. We'll provide all the electricity with wind, solar, geothermal, hydro, tidal, wave. These are all wind, water, solar technologies. We'll need storage for a 100% clean renewable energy world. So we'll have electricity storage, including concentrated solar power with storage, pumped hydro storage, existing hydroelectric dams, batteries, flywheels, compressed air storage, gravitational storage, and also heating and cooling storage, hot and cold storage in water tanks for both hot and cold, ice for cold storage, underground storage in boreholes, water pits, and aquifers. These are existing technologies, and also in building materials, we can store heat. And then we'll also use hydrogen for storage for mostly for long distance heavy transport, but also steel production and some other industrial processes. Briefly, let me just talk about how individuals can help in transitioning their own homes. And I'll just give an example of my own home. I built in 2017 or finished it, and it's all electric, no gas on the property. Has solar photovoltaics on the roof. It has batteries in the garage and electric cars, electric heat pumps for air and water heating and air conditioning, LED lights, electric induction cooktop stove. So here on the left, well, on the left is the inside unit for the induction cooktops, for the heat pumps for air heating and air conditioning. And on the right is the outside unit. So each zone of the house has one of these inside units. And then there are two of these outside units. And heat pumps are great because they don't create or destroy heat, they move it around. So they use 1/4 the energy as a gas heater. And as a result, the fuel cost is so much less. Here's a heat pump water heater. Again, it uses 1/4 the energy as a gas heater. And so it hardly uses any energy. And really efficient, works well. Electric induction cooktop stove. It boils water in half the time as natural gas. You can control the temperature very well. People don't like electric resistance stoves, but they do like electric induction cooktop stoves. And these are nice because of the 7 million people who die from air pollution each year, around 4 million are from indoor air pollution from burning biomass and coal indoors for home heating and cooking. So one of these electric induction units on the left, I mean, that costs like $50 to $100, and that could replace a coal or biomass or biofuel burning stove, save a lot of lives. It just runs on a little electricity. So solar panel and a battery and a stove can go a long way towards saving people's lives around the world. So I've had this now 4 years. This is actually the end of 4th year is this month, but here shows data for 3 years. So I'll say overall 4 years, I've generated about 120% of all my home and vehicle energy use from the solar on the roof. I've had no electric bill, no natural gas bill, no gasoline bill, and received an average of $700 a year from my community choice aggregation utility for the excess electricity I sold back to the grid. So the whole system, it pays itself off in about 5 years with subsidies and about 10 years without subsidies. And the solar system is warranted for 25 years. So it's really smart to do this for all new buildings in particular, to just have one source of energy, not two, just have electricity. By not putting gas, I avoided thousands of dollars of gas pipelines, gas hookup fee. And as I said, I don't pay an electric bill, gas bill, or vehicle fuel bill anymore. So the average person will save $4,000 to $15,000 up front, $3,000 to $10,000 per year. Payback time with subsidies at the federal level and some state levels is about 5 years. Without subsidies, 10 years. This is the performance of my solar system on the hottest day of the year this last year, September 6th. Outside temperatures were 106 degrees. Inside temperature is perfect 77 degrees. The temperature never changes indoors, no hour of the year. It's perfect temperature all year in the house with these heat pumps. But you can see on this day, well, I produced more electricity than I consumed to keep the house cool. And I sent the rest back to the grid. So this was a day where there was blackouts on the California grid, but there's no blackout in my home. And I sent electricity back to the grid. If everybody had a system like this, then there would be no blackouts. Just because there's using heat pumps instead of gas, or heat pumps for air conditioning, as well as heating. And similarly, if you have these in Texas, you wouldn't have blackouts either, because they use 1/4 the energy as the gas heaters that went down in Texas. But they're just more efficient to use heat pumps. And on top of, if you insulate your home more too, that also helps to reduce losses. Anyway, it's just a really efficient system. One more point I'll make about renewable energy and the weather. So we did this study looking at how do heat spells, how do cold spells affect wind energy? So like if you have really cold climate, it turns out that wind energy production is much higher. In fact, the colder it gets, the more wind energy output you get. And this shows the correlation between wind power output and building heat load, which is the heat you need to keep a building warm if it's too cold. So basically, the greater the heat load you need, the greater the wind power output there is in the US, Canada, and Europe, which means that if we build more wind turbines in cold climates, that will help in the winter to reduce heat demand, or you can use that energy from the wind turbines to power heat pumps to heat your home. So this is really important because that means we need more wind energy rather than less because like in the United States, the heating demand is 4 times the cooling demand. So we need a lot of heat, especially in the winters, and wind turbines will produce more electricity when it's colder. And so this will help a lot. Well, I just want to look at, so we did plans, in fact, for 143 countries of the world to see, is it possible to transition all these countries? And the summary of this is, well, yes, it is. This shows the end-use power demand in 2016 from all these countries, 12.6 trillion watts. In 2050, the demand goes up to 20.3 trillion watts. But if you electrify everything and provide the electricity with wind and water and solar, it goes down to 8.7 terawatts, or 57%. That 57% is, the reduction is due to the efficiency of battery electric and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles versus internal combustion engine vehicles. You get a 21.7% reduction, 3.4% reduction due to the efficiency of electrified industry, 13.2% reduction due to the efficiency of heat pumps over gas and even electric resistance heating, 12.1% reduction due to the fact that that's how much energy worldwide is used to mine, transport, and refine fossil fuels and uranium. So we eliminate that. And 6.6% reduction due to energy efficiency improvements beyond business as usual. So that's 57% reduction of demand without really changing our habits. And so the remaining demand, the remaining 8.7 terawatts, we propose to be powered on average over the world by 30.5% onshore wind, 14.5% offshore, 11% residential rooftop photovoltaics, 14% commercial government rooftop photovoltaics, 19% solar PV power plants, 4% CSP power plants, 1% geothermal, almost 6% hydro, all of which exists, and the rest is tidal and wave power. You might ask, how much land does this take? Well, for over the 143 countries, it's about 0.48% of land for the spacing between onshore wind turbines and 0.17% for concentrated solar power plus PV, the footprint. But offshore wind doesn't take up land, tidal and wave don't take up land. There's no new hydro in these plans. Rooftop PV does not take up new land. Geothermal is pretty small. So it's just these two, total 0.65% of the world's land. In comparison, in the US, 1.3% of all land is taken up by the fossil fuel industry. So this is lower land use. And even for the US, this number is around 1%, still less than what the fossil fuel industry takes up. In terms of keeping the grid stable, we did grid stability analyses throughout these 143 countries, breaking them up into 24 world regions. This is the result for the US, showing that it's possible to match power demand with supply every 30 seconds for 3 years in this case. In the United States, with just wind, water, and solar and storage, and using demand response. And I'm not going to go into the details, but just say that we were able to keep the grid stable everywhere. And we've even done more detailed studies down to the state level now, and found we can keep the grid stable everywhere with just wind, water, and solar and storage and demand response. Without nuclear, without carbon capture, without fossil fuels, without bioenergy, or anything else. What's the cost of doing this? Worldwide, it's a $73 trillion capital cost. In the US, about $7.8 trillion. So that's the cost of the Green New Deal, effectively, $7.8 trillion. So if we're spending $2 trillion on COVID relief, that's 1/4 of the Green New Deal. In other words, 1/4 of what we need to transition the entire United States for all purposes to clean renewable energy and storage and transmission distribution. Let's look at it a different way. The annual cost of fossil fuel energy in the US in 2050 will be about 17.7 trillion per year. Right now it's about 11 or 12 trillion per year. But the health cost is another 30 trillion, climate cost another 28 trillion. Total of $76 trillion per year is the social cost of energy in the fossil fuel case. If we eliminate fossil fuels and uranium, in fact, we eliminate the health and climate costs entirely, and the energy costs go down 61%. 57% of that's due to the fact that we have less energy use, 57% less energy use. The rest is due to the fact that the cost per unit energy is lower with clean renewable energy. So 61% lower energy costs and 91% lower social costs per year. So it's a definite cost savings. Now, okay, let me just the last section of this is policies. You know, what has been done so far and what do we need to do? So we developed our first energy plan in 2009. It was on the cover of Scientific American, and it was back then it was like, can we power the entire world for all purposes with just wind, water, and solar? And the conclusion was, well, it's technically and economically possible, but for social and political reasons, it'd probably take longer, maybe by 2050, with maybe 80% by 2030. But you know, that 2030 goal really stuck with people, and that turned out to be the basis for the Green New Deal, which is going to 100% renewable energy for all purposes by 2030. Little did we know that that would be the basis for it. But since then, there are now 61 countries that have laws committing themselves to go to a 100% renewable electricity. And of course, electricity is only 20% of end use energy. So we need not only electricity, but transportation, buildings, etc. Only Denmark has a law to go to 100% renewables across all energy sectors. The rest are just electricity right now. But still, there are 11 countries that are actually at or above 100% renewable electricity, or really near or above 100% renewable electricity in their annual average. Most of them are doing it with hydro, although Scotland last year was around 98% wind. Well, 98% renewables, with almost all of it being wind, and then some hydro. Kenya had geothermal as the major source, and hydro as well, but they're also 100%. And like Bhutan actually is 300%. It produces 300% of its electricity with hydro. So, and some of the other countries do as well. In the US, there have been at least 8 laws and resolutions proposed to go to 100% clean renewable energy. And the last 2 of these are the US Green New Deal. And so these started back in 2015. The very first one was actually based on our study that we published in 2015, which was a roadmap study for each of the 50 states to go to 100% renewables. And it even says in the resolution that this law was partially based on that. So, but there are no federal laws to go to 100% renewables, but there are 14 laws and executive orders at states that are either at the state or territory level, including in Rhode Island, Washington, D.C., Connecticut, Hawaii, California, New Mexico, Washington State, New York, Puerto Rico, Nevada, Maine, Virginia, Wisconsin, and New Jersey. And almost done here. There are also 176 cities that have committed to 100% renewables, including many of the biggest cities in the country. There are over 300 international businesses, including 8 of the 10 biggest businesses in the world, the ones in blue, that have committed to 100% renewables. So this is really what's driving change. In January or February of this year, 99.8% of all new electricity generation capacity in the US was wind, water, and solar. Only 0.2% was gas. And some of these laws, there are over 100 nonprofits committed to going to 100% renewables, and these nonprofits have been invaluable at trying to get state legislatures and governors to pass laws. and also at the city level as well. So they deserve a lot of credit for helping to get this transition moving. And then to summarize, and I didn't talk about jobs, but we found that we'd create 28 million more jobs than lost worldwide, including at least 3 million in the US. Talked about the footprint and spacing. We'd avoid air pollution deaths slower than reverse global warming. We find we can keep the grid stable with 100% clean renewable energy, reduce absolute energy costs 60%, and climate and health and energy costs 90% relative to fossil fuels. And finally, this is all summarized now in this new book that I published last year, but also there are all these papers. There are a lot of papers at the second link that have clean renewable energy roadmaps for the countries and the US states. And then there's an online course. And then the solutionsproject.org, which is what I helped co-found, has infographic maps for all the states, cities, and countries that we've done plans for so far. And I do a lot of stuff on Twitter. So if you're interested in following that, there's a link there. So anyway, I'm happy to answer questions at this point, and hopefully that's the end of my presentation.
So right now I'm giving the floor to David Kraft.
Thanks, Jan. And apologize for that, Rob. We usually do some instructions at the beginning. You will have an opportunity to ask questions as soon as I open the chat box up, and we take the questions that are listed there in order, and Jan will be monitoring who will go in order. What I wanted to do is put up a view graph that Mark did. He referenced it in his presentation here. Not everyone, but many people on the call tonight are from Illinois. And those of you who are here know that the energy legislation is coming to a real tense set of negotiations between now and the end of the session in June. And a number of years ago, when Mark was doing work on this, he did a state-by-state analysis, as he mentioned, of the different states and the capacity to reach 100% renewable. So let's see if I can get this a little bit better for you. Yeah, here we go. So this was the view graph for Illinois from that study, Mark. Now this information here obviously is going to be, what, about 5-6 years old. So what I was hoping you could comment on is, number one, some of the assumptions that you built into creating these kinds of numbers. And then number two, if you could, I know this is putting you on the spot, what numbers that you see here would be, would you think has been changed either by technology or politics or whatever? So I hope you can see the view graph at this point.
Yeah.
Okay,
Sure.
thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So yeah, this was a plan that we developed. It was actually, because it was published in 2015, we probably based it on 2 years before that. So it's probably at least 7 or 8 years old. But, you know, I'd modify it. We have a new plan, actually. We've just finished a new 50-state plan, although it's not published yet. But I'll just kind of summarize some of the results. I think for Illinois in particular, I think we'd have more rooftop solar, because cost of some of the assumptions we base this on are what are the costs at the time. So solar was more expensive back, 8 years ago. Now it's coming down so much that, we think we can put more solar on roofs than in this plan. So there'll be more rooftop solar, and maybe, concentrating solar hasn't really taken off. And I think Illinois it's pretty far north, so probably less concentrating solar. And, wind is going to be similar. So I'd say it's going to be more rooftop solar, and the wind will be the same, less concentrating solar compared with this. But I wish I could look at different screens, because I could actually look at what we have for our new plan and give you more precise results. But I think that'll take too much time.
I appreciate you doing that. Okay, Jan, I'll turn it back to you, and you can explain how we handle the chat, and I'll get the mechanics for that set up. Okay?
Okay, I'm calling on, I think, Rick Wilder. Did you have the first question?
Rob Wilder. Rick's my brother, but
Oh, sorry.
yes, Jan.
Okay, I got that wrong. Okay.
No, that's good. So, Mark, hi there. I think you made the right decision on nuclear. It's a tough one to say no nukes. And I think as well on natural gas. And I say this because there's a lot of studies that would include nat gas decreasing, but include it for stabilization backup. And that would include nuclear. And of course, we're losing in California a nuke plant thank goodness.
Yeah.
So my question is, this is because I'm knee deep in this topic as well. How do we near and midterm take care of matters? And I'm thinking that green hydrogen is a tough one because it's tough to store, it's tough to transport, it's tough to use. But if we add nitrogen and we have green ammonia, we've got a more or less green molecule. So for example, we have at our house for heating and cooling, just like you, the Mitsubishi mini split. I'm building a straw bale home. The mini split, the heat system you talked about and cooling works within a certain range, but in places that get very cold or very hot, the mini split heat pump doesn't really do it. Whereas I'm thinking in really cold areas, green ammonia might work with well enough with existing infrastructure, and also along with that, for example, renewable natural gas, RNG. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on those things.
Yeah, in terms of heat pumps, you're right that air source heat pumps, like the one I have, and I guess the one you have, are better for mild climates. So for more severe climates, we'd use a ground source heat pump. So there's a company in New York called Dandelion that they build these vertically drilled ground source heat pumps. So it used to be really expensive to do a ground source heat pumps because you'd have to excavate your backyard. In fact, I got a bid for one of those. There was like $70,000 just to do the excavation. But now that this technology, they have a vertical drill and it's really cheap. And it goes down like 30, I think it was like 30 meters. And they're just two small drill boreholes. And it's almost the same cost as a ground source heat pump. So in New York, they're using it everywhere already for these ground source heat pumps. So in terms of ammonia, well, first of all, for hydrogen, in our plans, we only use them for long distance heavy transport, mostly, well, long distance aircraft, long distance ships, long distance trucks and buses, because otherwise you just use electric. And you can also use it in steel production, replacing fossil fuels in steel production, and also certain microgrids for electricity and heat, but not normal electricity storage. Ammonia, we don't include ammonia for a specific reason. It's actually, it's a classic air pollutant, and Los Angeles is actually the #1 cause of visibility degradation in Los Angeles is ammonium nitrate, which is due to ammonia from all the feedlots and there's other sources combined with the nitrate from the oxides of nitrogen from vehicles. So you combine those two together and you get this horrible smog. And so ammonia, even though it's probably going to be contained for the most part, it's just a toxic chemical once it's in the air. Like hydrogen, we've done studies on hydrogen. It's pretty inert if it's in the air. It doesn't. In fact, there's less hydrogen from leakage. Even if you have like a 3% leakage rate of hydrogen, that's less hydrogen that's produced from combustion of gasoline vehicles. So you don't have the same chemical impact of hydrogen versus ammonia in the atmosphere. And I'm looking at it from an air pollution point of view, and that's why we don't include ammonia. In fact, ammonia used to be the first refrigerant before chlorofluorocarbons, and all the refrigerators would catch on fire.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, that's my answer.
Okay. Did you have a follow-up, Rob?
I guess I would just say that tangentially related. So we have the first clean energy index and fund on Wall Street. And I just mentioned this because we had $1 billion, almost $2 billion under management. We crashed in 2007, 2008 when solar crashed, wind crashed, everything crashed. But in the last 12 months, we've gained over $500 million, over $500 million. So we don't have ammonia. I wanted to get your thoughts on it, but we are pretty much 100% jiving with your profile. No nuclear. It's solar. It's wind. It's micro hydro, not large hydro. Battery storage, EVs, that sort of thing. So it's getting a lot of attention. Yeah,
I think we could do it. It's going to be mostly solar, wind, and batteries, but all the other stuff will help, like the hydro and heat storage and cold storage will help a lot too, because it's so cheap already. And that's most of the demand in the winters is heating, and most of the demand in the summer is cooling. So anyway, yeah, it's great that you're aligned.
Okay, I would like to interrupt here to point out that another board member has come on. Linda Lewison has joined our group, and she's on the board at NEIS. So I want to say hello to Linda. And there are now, here are the people in the stack. Chris Carrick is next. Then there's Sina Sugiono, then Tracy McClellan, and Barbara Warren. So we'll call now on Chris Carrick. Unmute yourself, please, and ask your question.
Hi, Mark.
Hello.
I'm dialing in from Syracuse, New York. And I tuned in late because I was actually leading a webinar for a community education program for heat pumps that I was leading today. And I just wanted to sort of correct the record that the installers we work with install cold climate air source heat pumps like the Mitsubishi and Fujitsu units, which actually do work below zero. NREL has published studies on installations in Alaska. So these units can work. They do have electric resistance backup for those coldest parts of the year. But the technology has come a long way. So I did wanted to mention that. The question is, I think your study accounts for the increased use of heat pumps in electric vehicles demand on the grid.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But does your cost estimates account for upgrades that would be needed to be made both at the transmission and the distribution level in terms of the cost of making this transition?
Yes, they do. Yeah, so our cost numbers include transmission distribution costs. In fact, they're a pretty large portion. I mean, a good, not the majority, but a good minority portion. In terms of heat pumps, you're absolutely right. You can use, there's no reason you can't use an air source heat pumps down to below zero. The thing is the coefficient of performance just goes from like 4 to 1. And so, whereas the ground source heat pump at 0, it'll be 5. And so that's why it's better. Yeah, and you can always use an electric resistance element as well on one. So yeah, in the worst case, it becomes an electric resistance heater. But just to optimize things, that's why ground source heat pumps, it's always going to be 5, even at below 0.
We've also had some folks enroll in our campaign who have kept their furnace and installed the heat pump right on the plenum. And so they have a hybrid system. So they have their furnace as a backup, and they mostly use the air source heat pump.
Right.
Good short-term transition.
Yep.
Thanks.
Okay.
Sure.
And then the next questioner is Sena Sugiono. So
Hi,
unmute yourself, please, and ask your question.
Hi, thank you, Mark, for the wonderful presentation. I was just wondering if in your financial analysis, you included transition fees, for example, bailouts for stranded assets by public utility companies, and how those come into like the equation in your transition plan. Thank you.
Yes. Well, we're not including bailout costs. So that would, well, we look at the cost. We compare the business as usual costs with the wind, water, solar costs, and the business as usual cost, well, just assumes there's no change. Wind, water, solar, yeah, we're not accounting for bailouts, but we do account for the social costs of, well, we do find that the people ask, well, what about the stranded assets? And how do you factor those in? Well, we don't include the stranded assets because those costs are less than the health and climate costs of the fossil fuel. So the health and climate costs of fossil fuels are much greater than the stranded asset cost by orders of magnitude. And, so it's not, to get the stranded asset costs, I don't know if it's something that, like, it's not really it's a cost, it's a private cost, but it's not a cost to society. It's a benefit to society because if you keep that asset, then you're actually costing people more because of the health and climate cost that the asset is causing. So anyway, we don't have a number for the stranded asset costs, but the bulk of it is less than, the total is going to be less than the health and climate costs that the assets are causing.
Oh, sorry. Am I allowed to ask a follow-up based on the response, or do I have to wait until everyone else?
Everyone's allowed one
Okay.
follow-up.
Thank you. Oh, one follow-up.
One follow-up, right.
Okay, a quick follow-up. The only reason I'm kind of asking is because a lot of, I guess, a lot of the legislative action and in the politics of it, people are more take into consideration these stranded assets. So I was just wondering if you maybe have some like suggestions, if you're engaged in advocacy, how exactly do we convey this idea that the social costs and the stranded assets, because the stranded assets seem to be more tangible losses for other stakeholders involved. Thank you.
Yeah, so, well, the way I think of it is that if you have a coal plant, I mean, you're causing more damage to society than you're benefiting. So those coal plant operators are not paying for the health and climate damage. So they shouldn't be getting any subsidy. They're basically be getting a subsidy, even though they should be paying a subsidy. So I think the key is in this case is to clarify to the legislatures that these people are causing more damage to society than they're eating. The energy they're producing has a high social cost that's not being accounted for. So if they want to stay in business, they should actually be paying for that health and climate costs. There should not be paid to go out of business, because it's actually helping society. It's reducing the cost to society for them to go out of business. So I think it's really an argument you have to make to the legislatures, because otherwise they're basically trying to pretend as if they're only suffering a loss and they're not causing a damage themselves.
Okay, thank you. So the stack now consists of Tracy McClellan, Barbara Warren, and then Stephen Sondheim. And Carolyn, I'm going to let you ask your question, then Linda Lewison and David Kraft. So our next questioner is Tracy McClellan. Unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. Mine is a two-part question about wind power. What say you about bird strikes and wind power? And with respect to that idea, I've heard that painting one of the blades black on a wind turbine mitigates that bird strikes. Do you know anything about that? And also the problem in wind power of people in the shadow of the windmill with the noise and the strobe effect of the turbine. And then with respect to electric vehicles, when I think of those, I think of a car unplugging from a gas pump and plugging into either a nuclear plant or a coal plant. Because in Illinois, last I looked, we got almost like 97% of our energy from those two sources. That was quite some time ago, so that information may be dated. But to put the question in terse terms, I think of electric vehicles as unplugging from the gas pump and plugging into either a nuclear plant or a coal plant. What do you think about all that?
Yeah, so let me answer the first question about the wind turbines. They're both good questions. So yeah, wind turbines do kill birds, but the numbers are small in comparison with other sources of bird kills. So the Bird Conservancy and the Fish and Wildlife Service estimate in the US about 500 to 600,000 birds per year. But they also estimate are killed due to wind turbines. They also estimate about 10 to 50 million are killed due to communication towers. About 1 billion are killed to buildings, and about 3 billion to cats. So the numbers are really small compared to other sources of bird kills. In comparison with other energy sources, there's at least one study that's looked at bird kills due to nuclear versus coal and gas versus wind. And so wind turbines kill from that study like 1/10 the number of birds per kilowatt hour as a coal or natural gas plant, because coal and natural gas kill birds not only from the air pollution and from the buildings, but also the mining devastation. And nuclear plants also kill about the same number of birds per kilowatt hour as wind turbines, both due to the land taken up from uranium mining, from the land taken up from the nuclear plants, and from the transmission lines as well. Now, I'm not sure how accurate that is, but the point is they're definitely, with regard to fossil fuels, you're actually reducing bird kills by going to wind turbines compared with fossil fuels. But in either case, definitely, I did see that study where they did actually experiment by painting one wind turbine, one of the 3 blades, black, and that reduced bird kills quite a bit. So something so simple had such a big effect, and I think anything like that that can help, I'm totally for it. With regard to electric vehicles, so I look at it from the air pollution point of view first, and then the climate point of view second. Air pollution, if you go to an electric vehicle, you take air pollution emissions off the street. And that means, even if you transfer it to a coal plant or a nuclear plant, there's not so much emissions, but even if it's to a coal plant, you're actually reducing morbidity and mortality significantly, reducing asthma, because what's called the intake fraction, which is the fraction of emissions that you breathe in, the intake fraction of vehicle emissions is 30 times that of power plant emissions. So every unit of emissions you take off the street and move to a power plant, you're reducing health effects 30 times. So there's no comparison. I mean, whatever the climate impacts of going to, moving from gasoline to, coal plants, for example, they're overshadowed by the air pollution benefits. Now, in terms of the climate benefits, keep in mind that an electric car uses 1/4 to 1/5 the energy as a gasoline car, and because they're so efficient, and so it's using 1/4 to 1/5 the energy. So you're not moving the equivalent gasoline to the equivalent coal. You're basically the energy you need 1/4 to 1/5 the energy from the coal plant to provide the same energy that your electric car is going to drive you compared to the gasoline. So all studies that I've seen that are actually not by people in the fossil fuel industry show that you do get a benefit even with in the worst case of getting your electricity from coal. You do get a climate benefit, because you're using so much less energy when you use electric cars that, yeah, you do burn coal in that case, but the amount of energy you need from that coal is much less than the energy you need from the gasoline that you replace. But anyway, from a health benefit, it's by far much better. And then eventually if you go to all electric cars now, eventually we will go to 100% clean renewable electricity, ideally pretty fast in Illinois, and then we'll get rid of that problem as well.
Thank you. Now the stack looks like Barbara Warren, Sandy Capitan, and then Steve Sondheim. So Barbara, would you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Okay. Thank you, Mark. I noticed when you put up the different countries that you had done the analysis in, that you had a number of low-income countries, and I was wondering if you were able to identify other benefits that weren't quantifiable, but that might have accrued to particularly a low-income country from the water, wind, solar.
Well, I think the biggest benefit is electrifying buildings, not because a lot of these developing countries, they burn biomass like dung and wood and also coal in their homes, and with little ventilation. So a lot of people die from this at a young age. And so going to electricity and using induction cooktops, and even if we can do heat pumps for heating or cooling, that will help reduce health costs substantially. And so that's the biggest benefit I could see. But also, there are a lot of people in the developing countries who don't have any energy at all. And with clean renewable energy, with storage, like battery storage and solar, you can develop microgrids where you don't need transmission and distribution over long distances. You can bring power to remote communities locally and provide the power locally and then store it locally. And then if you use efficient energy technologies like heat pumps, LED lights, and energy efficient appliances, you don't need a lot of energy either. So I think those are the two best benefits: to electrify buildings and to bring microgrids to people who don't have any energy.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Steve Capitan, could you unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you. DeKalb, Illinois has Facebook coming to, they're currently building a data center on the outskirts of town. And they've committed to using solar energy that they buy through the system. What my question to you is, would there be a cost-effective way to create a solar farm, small solar farm adjacent to the facility that could avoid the transmission costs? Would that be cost-effective?
Well, I think certainly putting it on the roof of the building, and I think if they're getting solar, I mean, I don't know how far south this town is in Illinois. Is it?
Well, see, the way that it works in Illinois is that you can purchase through the system solar energy. It could be anywhere in the state. It could be anywhere they're getting it from. So it's not really adjacent. It's just a part of the system, and it's designated solar
Right.
energy.
Well, I'm guessing they're paying to build a solar farm somewhere somebody will have to build a solar farm to satisfy that, because I'm sure all the solar is already taken up by other purchasers. So usually these companies like Google and Apple, they'll purchase and even my university did this, they purchased 2 solar farms. So they actually have them built. And even though they don't get specifically that electricity, they're basically, that electricity is going to the grid, but they're claiming credit for that electricity. So, I think you put as much as possible on their roof, and then the rest you put in a utility scale farm wherever you can, wherever it's sunniest. So I think, certainly the transmission loss locally, it's not going to be, I don't think it'll be large, even if they had it far away in the state. It's large if it's 2,000 kilometers away, but not a few hundred miles. So I don't think that, I think it's more important to have, it's a balance between some transmission distribution losses and having a better solar area. And also depends on the land price as well.
Thank you. Steve Sondheim, you're next.
Okay, thank you, Mark, so much. What I see here is that you're breaking myths with this analysis. There's so many unaddressed myths. One of them being, and I'll ask my question in a second, one of them being that the climate will go to hell in a handbasket unless we keep nuclear. And my question really is, here, I need to look at it just a second. How soon could we get off fossil and nuclear? They're saying in Illinois it's going to be 2050, which allows them to bail out, to extend, to do SMRs, which in my opinion robs the progress that we could make possibly, I'm guessing, by 2030. So, and the other thing is I'd like to see a transition plan where we actually pick which plants are the most dangerous, the most expensive, and we make a plan to drop them ASAP. So please comment. Thank you.
Yeah, well, we did a study for New York because they bailed out 3 nuclear reactors at a price of about almost $8 billion for over 12 years. And we found that if you spent that same money just on buying wind and solar, you could not only replace the nuclear, which you'll have to do in any case, but you can actually replace a little more. And so it actually costs, by not shutting them down, that actually resulted in more carbon. Now, so the bottom line is, if you have to bail out a nuclear reactor, you should shut it down. Nuclear reactors that don't need to be bailed out, okay, you can let them go until they naturally retire, but definitely don't allow bailouts, because they're going to shut down eventually, and then you're going to have to spend all that money to replace them at that point. Why not use the bailout money to help replace them right away? And if that bailout is big enough, like in New York, then you can definitely replace the whole thing just with the bailout money. Now, with small modular reactors, they're not even being proposed to be ready until 2030. So that's 9 years. We need 80% of the problem solved by then. And the cost is already escalating, and we don't even know if they'll be ready 2030. That's just their estimate. Everything with nuclear is always delayed and more expensive. I think it's just another boondoggle and waste of it's an opportunity cost. If you're spending on that, you're not spending that money on putting stuff up right now and reducing emissions right now. So I think we should focus on what works and focus on what we can put in quickly, and just keep our eye on the ball and not waste time or money on things that we know take long and will be expensive and have uncertain consequences. We know that existing reactors have lots of side effects, and there's no proof that even small modular reactors won't have most of those same side effects, if not all of them. I mean, in fact, in some cases, they'll be worse, because now right now there's weapons proliferation with regular nuclear reactors. Now you have these small ones you can put on a ship and just they can be distributed all over the world, and you can then harvest plutonium from the fuel rods. And it just seems like nuclear weapons in a box. So there's no there's no proof. And then they say that they won't have waste, but then that means they'll refine the uranium more, so it'll be more weapons grade uranium. It's just like, it's the same old story. And they used to have small modular reactors. They started them in the 50s, but they thought, oh, these are too expensive. That's why they went to big ones. Now they're just unlearning their lesson and going back to small ones, which will be more expensive because you just need more materials to get the same energy for a bunch of small ones versus a big one.
Yeah. The follow up I really want to know is, in 2050s, not okay, in my opinion. How soon could we have enough alternate energy, renewable, energy efficiency, where we could start dropping these? And I was quite impressed by Biden's promise to have 50% renewable by 2030. The legislature is using this thing about protecting climate change to keep the nuclear. So how soon could we really do it?
Well, I mean, California last weekend, for at least a few minutes, was close to 90% wind, water, and solar. And for 6 hours from 11 a.m. to 5 p.m. was over 80%. I mean, Iowa's at 60% wind right now in the annual average. And so there are states that have aggressively put up renewables that are very far ahead. So it's really as fast as your legislature wants it to. I mean, you can put up wind and solar really quickly. That's the thing about it, and it's low cost. So the more that we divert money to nuclear, coal with carbon capture, if you hear the word carbon capture, be concerned, because that's like a diversion from real solutions. It doesn't actually solve any problem. It just allows fossil fuel plants to continue. It requires more energy. It needs equipment costs. Because you need more energy, you have more air pollution. We didn't talk about carbon capture, but I'll just give one example. There's been one carbon capture plant built in the US attached to an energy facility. That was in Texas. That was built in 2015. They spent $1 billion, and it was for a coal plant. They built carbon capture equipment. To run the carbon capture equipment, they built a natural gas plant just to run the carbon capture equipment for the coal plant. And the two together was $1 billion on top of the cost of the coal plant originally. So it's just a tax on the people, of the consumers of the energy, mostly the people who can't afford it the most, because they pay a higher fraction of their electricity bill to energy, or their total bill to energy. And because they had more natural gas now, there's more air pollution. You don't capture any air pollution with carbon capture. You have more mining of gas, so more devastation of the landscape. What did they do with the carbon that was captured? They piped it to an oil field to get more oil out of the ground. And the whole thing was so inefficient that over 20 years, it would only reduce carbon dioxide 10%, not 90%, but 10%. It was so inefficient, they shut it down last year. They just mothballed the whole thing. And this is what they want us to keep spending money on. Just ridiculous. I mean, they don't even attempt to reduce air pollution or mining. So they're just focusing, they just keep you focused on, we're reducing carbon, and they're hardly reducing carbon, but all these other things go up, and they don't want you to know that. So every time you get distracted by carbon capture or nuclear power, that's like something that's not going to help solve the problem. That's something that's going to just delay a solution, because we're going to take money away from the solutions that are working.
My question was, is there an online way to get the state maps, the new ones? I understand that the 2015 study, did I understand correctly, there's a new one. And I'm delighted to hear that Illinois is even thinking about getting rid of some reactors. I mean, the whole state, not just our activist group. And I hope you will lose the distinction of having more nuclear power than any other state. I'm calling you from Washington.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I just put a link on I put 2 links on the chat. The first one is to where all the state plans, all our country and state plans are.
Great.
And if you go down towards the middle of that link, it has the new state plans. Now, it doesn't have the paper, but I actually do have the infographics for each state. It says 2021 roadmaps. But don't send that out, because I just put that out for private use. So you can look at it, but until it gets published, I don't really want to advertise it too much. But you're welcome to look at it. There's one for Illinois as well.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
Okay, Linda Lewison, how about you unmute and ask your question?
Hi, Mark. Thanks. That was brilliant presentation. Gave us so much information to think about and plan on. And I want to put my question at the end, Jan, because it can wait and defer to everybody else. And then if there's time at the end, I'll ask my question.
Okay, Dave, you go ahead and ask your question.
I don't believe I really had one, but I think we might have skipped Catherine Skopik, so perhaps she should go next.
My impression was that Catherine was just saying hello and hi to everybody, and glad she's here and glad we're here. But if you do have a question, unmute yourself, Catherine.
Yeah, actually, I wrote 3 questions in the chat, and I just
I didn't see them.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you, David. And thank you so much, Mark. I really appreciate all of this, and I'll try to make it as fast as possible. My question has to do with the grid and nationally getting this job done. Your comments that you just made about, some states are way ahead, like Iowa is 60% already on renewable. Do you see this going state by state? Do you see federal and state working together? I mean, if there were a plan federally to ramp up, would the states be able to come into that? Is it state by state going? And we know that the grid from the west for us, I'm here in New York City, is solar, then middle of the country is wind primarily for renewables, but we need the energy on the coasts. So we are going to need some transmission lines. So I'm sorry there's so many questions wrapped up in there. But will the grid be built? Will the grid be built by state and local, or in cooperation with private companies? So whatever one of those questions you want to ask, I just want to see our country 100% renewable ASAP.
Yeah, thanks. That's a good question. Well, I think each state is going at its own pace right now. The federal government can help by incentivizing transitions in each state. And it's been helping that the costs of wind and solar and batteries have been coming down. So that's encouraging more states just to go there, even if they're politically against it. And in fact, that's what's going on in Iowa. There are no laws in Iowa mandating 100% renewables. It's just so cheap. Wind is so cheap that's why they've been putting it up so fast. I think, in terms of transmission, it's always a trade-off between more transmission and more storage. If you have a lot of storage, you don't need a lot of transmission. If you don't have any storage, you'll need more transmission. So whether you need, I don't think you'll actually need transmission from the coasts to the center of the country. There's a lot of energy in the center of the country that can be harnessed. You might need some like from Wyoming to California for some cases, like there's a lot of wind in Wyoming, but you can also have wind from going from Wyoming to Illinois. So you don't need to go from California to Illinois. So I think what we're finding is storage is becoming so cheap that it's beating out transmission. So we can just buy a lot of batteries, and there's hardly any zoning issue. It's hard to get zoning approved for big transmission projects. That's the biggest problem with transmission. So I think the more storage that we can use and local production, the better. And I think that's where things are headed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark.
Sure.
And my question is that the Irish Bowling group did a presentation in Chicago, and they presented a picture in Germany where the transmission was the major problem with switching over to renewables. And I wonder if you know anything about that the energy is produced in the south and it's used in the north of Germany, and that getting the energy up there is the problem.
I don't know much about that. I do know that they're building a lot of renewables still. So even if it's a problem, they're managing to overcome it. They're still building a lot of offshore wind and a lot more solar, and they have mandates to build even more over the next few years. So I think they'll solve the problem, because they really, in fact, I think there was a Supreme Court decision in Germany today or yesterday where the Supreme Court said that you're not doing enough, and they have to do more to address the climate problem. So I think they'll find a way, but I don't know the specifics of that issue.
And Jane, you're next, and you could unmute yourself and ask your question. You're on. Oh.
I want to express my regret that I came on so late. I'm one of the people whose link didn't work, and I belatedly emailed Dave and he gave me the link. So my apologies. I heard Stephen's question a few minutes ago, and it gives me the idea that I'm not repeating something that's already been discussed. If I am, please tell me. But I'm wondering, Mark, if the Illinois legislature decided next week that we were going to go full blast to convert to renewables, what would be entailed and how much time would it take, leaving aside the cost? But also, I think you said that although a state and federal program, or at least federal funding, would be desirable, I don't think it really exists. So I'll leave money out of the picture, but you can follow up on that if you would, please. However, what would it take for Illinois to go completely renewable?
Well, nice thing about wind and solar in particular is that it's going up really fast. And I think you basically, like our plan for Illinois, for example, we specify how many solar panels and how many wind turbines are needed, how much land area that would take. So one idea is to take something like this plan, or it could be another plan for Illinois that's similar, and you basically schedule the growth, the implementation of the renewables over time, the storage that you need over time. And so that's the value of these kinds of plans, is it gives you like an end post what the state would look like at 100% renewables, and then you can actually then ramp that up. And ideally we'd ramp it up so it's all done by 2040, and with 80% by 2030. I mean, 2050 is an end date, but ideally we do 2040, and each sector is a little different. You can do electricity faster, let's say, than transportation. Buildings, you need to retrofit existing buildings. I mean, there are other states that have these aggressive plans. So I think, maybe Illinois can look at another state that's actually does have a 100% plan. In New York and California, for example, they both have these plans to go to zero greenhouse gases by 2045 or 2050. It's just ramping up the generation and the storage, and you'll need some transmission distribution as well over time. So that's how I do it.
I understand that the best place to put turbines in northern Illinois is in the middle of the lake, and that's a huge technological challenge and a great cost. Do you think that's correct, or do you think we can get around that?
It's not a technological challenge at all. I mean, they have lots of offshore wind turbines in the oceans, much deeper than the lake,
really,
around the world. And the costs have come down tremendously. It used to be like 15 cents a kilowatt hour. Now it's like 7 cents a kilowatt hour. But it's even in a lake, it's probably even less, because most of the cost is the installation. And if it's not that deep.
But that's one of the huge stumbling blocks for the legislature anyway.
Well, they don't pay for it. Let's say private investors will pay for it.
I see.
So the stumbling block is really to get the permission to do it.
I see. Thank you.
Okay.
Now on the stack we have Dee Silverman and Kathy Iwane. And then I think it would be time for Linda Lewison. So Dee Silverman, would you mind unmuting and asking your question?
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello, Mark. Thank you for your work, first of all. I've been a fan, greatly impressed.
Thank you.
I had a couple of questions. First, Illinois now has a bill, Dave Kraft, I'm sure we remember the number, I don't right now, that in motion to provide for community transitions, job training, and revenue return to local communities in the state for retiring new nukes, or existing nukes rather. I think it's for the next 5 years is the way the legislation is set up, that communities and labor can apply for support. I'm not sure that that bill has much support yet, but it raises a question. There are competing labor bills in Illinois that are pro-nuke or not very supportive anyway of any alternatives, really. What sort of labor support have you had? What's your advice on working with labor and local communities to devise transition plans and get the kind of support that's necessary for coalitions, particularly in this state, to come together about a 100% renewable plan? And my apologies again, I was a bit late getting in like other folks, so I may have missed your coverage of this already.
Well, for Illinois, for example, we estimate about 340,000 more jobs than lost from a transition. So I'd use that as the argument. I mean, over the years, I've had some interactions with labor unions. Like in New York, they were most of the labor unions were favorable. There were some that were disfavorable, but most of them actually were favorable. But I haven't, in a few years, I haven't had too much interaction with the labor union, so I don't know what the latest is. I think it's important to get their support for sure, but I think the argument is they're going to create more jobs than are lost, and these are good jobs too. They're not just short-term jobs at low pay. So so we do the numbers for each state, and hopefully those numbers will help convince labor leaders that this is a benefit, because they're continuous. You'll need to be constructing for the next 30 years. And even then, some things will retire and you'll need more construction. So these are like continuous jobs. Even if they're construction jobs, they're continuous for the next 100 years. Just because not only for the new infrastructure, but when the new infrastructure retires, you'll need to replace that.
Right. Thank you. And then a quick follow-up, if I could.
Yes.
Comment in the 70s and early 80s, when there was labor support for transition, it came out of the Humphrey Hawkins coalitions and environmentalists for full employment. That is to say, a larger policy framework for reforming and moving towards full employment nationally as policy. And perhaps that kind of dialogue needs to be entered locally as well. The second question was about Gina McCarthy. And in general, the Biden administration seems to be appointing people who are out of the gate advocating for nuclear as a done deal. Do you have any comment on her or more broadly that position?
Yeah, I mean, it does concern me, although in reality, the Biden administration is kind of, a lot of the people work there are all of the above. They have this all of the above policy idea. And I think, they want to keep everything open. In reality, there's nothing there's no new nuclear being built. There's no carbon capture being built. Biofuels are not going anywhere either. And so it's a lot of more talk and window dressing to appease people than actual action. But I wish they would just focus in their words on what really works and just tell everybody the truth about what's working and what's not working. But they do leave the door open for it in case it does come along and gets better. And that concerns me. But in reality, there is nothing being built. There's only 2 nuclear reactors being built in the entire United States, and those are in Georgia. And those are, as I mentioned before, 16 to 17 years it'll take between planning and operation. I mean, they're almost done, but they're not, they're not close to, there's nothing else even being, on the drawing board really.
Thank you. If there's time, I'll ask another question, but I want to give room for others. Thank you.
Okay, Kathy, Iwane, and Sina, Linda, I don't want to keep putting you off, but Sina Segono wants to ask another question, as apparently Mr. Silverman. So
It's fine. It's fine.
okay, so next would be Kathy Iwane. Unmute yourself, please, Kathy.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, Mark. Thanks so much for your presentation. So proud and excited. And I have your book, so it's ridiculous for you to go in right now. My question is basically, I attended the town hall with AOC last week and talking about the Green New Deal. And she needs to be educated because she's clearly under the impression that nuclear needs to be added to our all of the above approach to the new nuclear generation, the Green New Deal. And she was sort of deflecting questions about, well, why would you do that? The carbon footprint of nuclear is clearly so high and it won't do anything, but she thinks it will definitely add to the decarbonization of our profile. And so you don't really, my question was a little bit, I wrote it down, but what I would like to say is, have you had an opportunity, or are you amenable, or are you interested in educating the powers that be? I know this is putting you on the spot, and do you have any interest, or perhaps you've already done this? I just don't know why we don't have the appropriate people, the best scientists in the United States, to sit in front of these very, AOC is completely capable and so intelligent, but it feels like she's either being lobbied heavily by the nuclear, or it could be our profile that needs nuclear weapons, our the nuclear industrial complex. I'm just astounded at the fact that she's not educated on this. And I wondered if you could comment.
Yeah. No, I'm always happy to talk to people, groups, and individuals about science behind all this and why we don't include nuclear and other things. And I think what's going on is there are a certain number of people there who are these all of the above policy people left over from the previous Obama administration. Who some of them used to support natural gas. Maybe they don't support gas anymore, but they still support nuclear and bioenergy and carbon capture. Which we call all of the above, just try everything and hope something sticks. And there are enough of them that probably bent her ear, and they're, because I think she used to be not for that. And so the only way she could have changed is if somebody's been convincing her. And so I think there are enough people in the administration that are trying to broaden the portfolio to try to get the broadest coalition, and which is a mistake in terms of actually solving the problem. The only good thing is it's so uneconomic and it will never happen. The nuclear, you can legislate it all you want, but the technologically and cost-wise and delay-wise, it's just never going to happen. So it's really just going to be a distraction. But this is why it's important for people to know, what is working and what we can put up quickly. So yeah, I'm open to talking to anybody.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, Sina Sugoni. It's Sugiono.
No worries, right? The first name works. Also, if Linda has a question, I asked earlier, so it may be fair if she goes first.
No, you go ahead.
Okay, thank you. It's kind of a two-part question. The first part is in response to an answer you gave about transitioning for labor. I'm wondering how exactly you see transitioning from, let's say, people who are engaged in the fossil fuel industry. They have mining, their skills are related to mining, and then it's a completely different skill set. So you mentioned about how jobs are created, high-paid jobs, which requires technical abilities. But if the abilities are like really different, how do you see the workers being transitioned? And this kind of ties into the second question, which is, what's your take on transitioning into geothermal? Because I've heard research that people are saying that geothermal is a good replacement because it technically also involves like drilling, and so there's not much scale replacement there. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Well, yeah, there's some jobs in renewables that are easy to transition, like offshore oil drilling to offshore wind, because the platforms are similar. And yeah, geothermal from drilling to geothermal. Although geothermal will probably be a couple percent of the total, maybe 1% of the total end use energy, so it's not going to be huge. But yeah, certainly solar installation, it doesn't require a huge amount of training. Wind turbine maintenance, but there's also appliances, electric appliances or factories. I mean, we definitely need job retraining. So this would be part of it, would be to retrain people. It's not automatically going to go from a coal mine to, wind turbine technician without training. So I don't want to pretend as if that's really easy. I just think we have to do it. Either we have to retrain people, and I think that's actually, from what I understand, something that Biden's doing really well is he's actually focusing on jobs, and that will allow transition. So he's actually there's people who are concerned the most, like our coal miners and other types of drillers, and so he's focusing on trying to create jobs for them in renewable energy, and I think that's good. I don't say I have the answer to that, but I think it's a combination of retraining and making opportunity. The jobs will be there available, so there'll be motivation for people to train to get them.
Thank you. Okay, we have about 4 minutes left, and I'd like Linda to ask her question and then turn this over to Dave for announcements and closing the meeting.
Thank you. So I'd just like to say again, Mark, how much I appreciated everything you had to say, and how useful it is, especially this month in Illinois. And my question is just something on one of your slides. You mentioned, maybe you can find it quickly, that there was a 61.4% maybe drop in energy use. And that made up, your information that you derived. I couldn't understand what does it mean that's such a large number, a drop in energy use? Do you know what I'm referring to?
Yeah, there was a 57% reduction of energy consumption, end use energy consumption. And that's due to, we're talking about when you switch from gasoline to electricity for vehicles, you use 1/4 the energy.
I see.
Because a gasoline car, only 17 to 20% of the energy in the gasoline goes to move the car, and the rest is waste heat. Mm-hmm. With an electric car, 80 to 86% of the electricity in the car goes to move the car, and the rest is waste heat. So you use 1/4 the energy. And so if you average over all sectors, that was like 23% reduction of the demand if you electrify all vehicles, and also some hydrogen fuel cell. And then heat pumps is another thing. They use 1/4 the energy as a gas heater. So averaged over all energy sectors, that's about 13% reduction. And then there's a 12% of all energy is used to mine, transport, and refine fossil fuels and uranium. But in a wind, water, solar system, you don't need to do that. You don't have any mining because your fuel comes right to you from the wind and the solar. And so that's another energy saving. So when I say energy savings, it's we don't need as much energy because our appliances and machines are much more efficient.
Thank you.
Okay, Dave, do you want to close this meeting?
Okay, thank you. Mark, I'm very, very grateful for you being with us tonight. This was the timing couldn't have been better given the fact that, at least in Illinois, these critical energy legislation pieces are coming up and are going to be debated over the next month. You said something, I can't remember exactly how you said it tonight, but it fits perfectly for this closing. I want all of you who are here tonight, and I know you're not all from Illinois, but this applies to you as well. When we did our promotion for this here in Illinois, we sent it out to our 130-person reporter list. We sent it out to over 60 or 70 Illinois officials, staff persons, people in state government, the governor's office, expressing what an important session this was going to be, because it talked about how we get to 100% renewables. And as you can see tonight, or maybe you can't see it, but I can tell you, we have no participation from these people. And I want to bring that up so you all understand just how patronized we all are and how disregarded we have been in this conversation about energy, that to have an international expert available for free for an hour and a half was just not an incentive enough for these people to listen. So it becomes our job to start forcing them to listen to people like Mark Jacobson. We have to make their political lives miserable from here on out in the next 30 to 40 days here in Illinois. We have to be royal pains in the asses. And we have to say, look, there are other ways of doing this. And it can't be business as usual with the insiders being the only ones allowed in the conversation. So again, Mark, thank you so much. And we did record this tonight. We will make the recording available next week after we edit out some of the technical glitches and the ums and ahs and things like that. And we will make it available to you all and to you, Mark, as well. And you can use it for whatever purpose you'd like. Let me stop there and see if there's any last word you want to give, and then I'll make a few announcements and we'll wrap it up. Mark?
Well, yeah, I want to thank you all very much for attending, and especially the organizers. And this is, yeah, really a good event for me. I mean, it's a good way to clarify my thoughts and get information out to more people. And this is an information game, I think. I mean, you know, we do all the science, but unless people hear out, get the information, unless we get this information out to large numbers of people, it all falls on deaf ears. So hopefully some of this trickled through, and you know, and then hopefully it'll actually have a big impact in Illinois. And in our state plans that are coming out, I mean, hopefully those will actually also have an impact, the new ones. So anyway, I look forward to seeing progress in Illinois and elsewhere in the US. And thank you all very much again.
Thank you, Mark. Next month, we're doing things a little bit differently. Normally, we do Night with the Experts on the last Thursday of each month. But next month, we are moving it up a week. It'll be the third Thursday, May 10th. And we're doing this one in-house. We don't mean to be presumptuous, but NEIS is going to be hosting a sort of a reflection on the energy legislation being debated in Springfield from the standpoint of what's missing in the discussion. We've raised this numerous times with the CEJA bill and other legislation that's out there, that there are significant things relating to nuclear that they're not even talking about. So that's what we're going to talk about next May 20th, third Thursday of May. So I thank you for being here tonight. I want to thank the NEIS board members, Jan Budart, Lynn Lewison, and Stephanie Belenko is here, I believe.
Yes.
And we hope that you will join us next month for Night with the Experts. So good night, have a good weekend, stay well.